Hello, everybody. Today we're joined by Steve Veasey. Just want to thank you up front, Steve, for coming on and sharing your story and your time today.
And thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to hanging out, having some coffee with you.
So, funny story. We first connected when Steve commented on an article I wrote about living with epilepsy. So, as a fellow epileptic, we already had that in common. So, I wanted to find out a little bit more about him as a person. So, I clicked through on his Instagram profile to find out more about him. And I found out that we have more than that in common. And he also has an incredible story. He's an incredible person. And that's what leads us here today. So, thank you again, Steve.
I'm delighted to say the least. So looking forward to it.
So, I'd say you are an artist now, and you were at one time you were hoping to go to Emily Carr University of Art and Design, um, somewhere I attended. Again, the similarities.
Yeah,
But as you alluded to in one of our conversations, it's not been such a simple journey. So, uh, how did you end up where you are today? I know that's a big question, but
there are so many layers. So I'm excited to dive into all of them. And I hope that by the end of this conversation, everything will come together for everybody listening and for you too. Um, wow. I'd like to approach this story kind of through because we have that connection of the epilepsy. I'd like to approach it through that lens of where we're at. Um, so let's see here. So I'm epileptic. I've been diagnosed for 38, or sorry, I'm 38 years old. I've been diagnosed for 18 years now, but I had epilepsy and have had it my entire life and wasn't aware until the age of 20 that I actually have epilepsy. So I have what are called partial onset seizures, which traditionally aren't when you think of seizures, a lot of people think of, falling on the floor and frothing at the mouth, and that's what Hollywood portrays for us. So when I was growing up and having my seizures where I generally space out or blank out or say some nonsense or go off and do my own thing and quietly, nobody really knew what was happening with me. Nobody knew what was going on. And I remember being 8 years old and I would just have them quietly. And I didn't have the verbiage to attach to describe them. All I could describe was my sensation. So when I'd go to the doctor, I would let him know, once in a while I space out. Or one of the, so when you have a seizure, they have a phrase for it. It's called an aura, if you're not familiar with it. And it's that little window of time before a seizure starts. Excuse me. And for some people, it's lengthy, and for some people, it's pretty quick. So my aura, what I experience personally, is sometimes people get a funny taste or a smell going on. I actually get, I'm so sorry. I actually get a taste in the back of my throat. You know that moment before you're gonna throw up, not to be gross, but when you feel it
yep.
building in the back of your throat. That's what I get. And then from there, so I feel like I'm gonna throw up, and then I get into a seizure where I space out. So I've often described it as I was growing up as sick feelings because I didn't know how else to describe it. And when I have a seizure and do my random things, I don't know what's going on, and I have no memory of it whatsoever. So I'd be going to the doctor 8, 10 years old and saying, I'm having these things happen and just completely disregarded or dismissed. Doctor would just say, it's, you're growing up. I remember when I was 13, you're going through puberty. This is natural. And well, nobody else seems to be spacing out. So it took until the age of 20. I had a car accident while I was having one of these episodes. I drove into a retainer wall and broke my collarbone. I totaled my Honda Accord, like, to the point where I don't personally think I should have survived this crash on my own. My passenger seat was literally right up beside me. Like, there's no way I should have, on paper, just lived through this. So I walked away with a broken collarbone and went in an ambulance to the hospital. I was in the bed. Everything's kind of a blur still with it, but I remember my family doctor coming in to visit me, and he's looking at my chart and he's like, you're epileptic. How come you've never come to see me about this before? And Man, I'm not a physical, like a violent person, but in that moment, if I wasn't in a broken collarbone in a bed, I wouldn't have hit him. But oh, that was tough to hear. So it didn't make a lot of sense at the time because I never knew seizures to be different than grand mal seizures or tonic clonic, whatever you know them as, what we traditionally see a seizure to be. I wasn't familiar with that at all. So I was very confused with it. So that began the journey of learning more about it, going for MRI scans, EEGs, all different testing over the years. I've seen now probably 7 or 8 neurologists over the last 18 years, of which few to none have been able to help me. They've often said, "We're not sure what the diagnosis is. We're not sure. You have a very strange case because a few years ago, um, actually, it's closer to 10 years ago, I started having a few grand mal seizures. And traditionally, if you have the partial onset seizures where you space out, you don't tend to have the grand mal seizures, or at least it's very uncommon. And the other tricky thing with it is all you can really do, aside from get brain surgery, is medicate, which
Right.
is the route I've taken. And I think I've tried pretty much everything under the sun as far as medication goes and combinations of medication. And I don't know if it's effective or not because I'm still having seizures. My daughter asked me about that recently. She was like, it's does the medication not work? I'm like, well, we don't really know because in theory, what if I wasn't medicated and maybe I would have 20 every day?
Right.
It could be working. We'll never know, and I'm not going to risk it to find out. So um, when I started having a few grand mal seizures as well, my neurologist really didn't know what to do with me. They said, now you're really in a new category where we don't know where to navigate. So then the other thing too is as I journal and track what epilepsy looks like for me and my seizures, I try and write down circumstances of where I'm at, what happened from what I can recall. I am very, very fortunate and blessed that I have had a wife who we were, I think, dating when I got my diagnosis and then have been married ever since. So she has seen me through the entire journey. She's been there for me through it. And I haven't driven a car since I was just over 20 years old. And that's that in itself. I mean, she's our sole transportation in our house to get everywhere we need to go. Um, which brings its own mental health struggles personally with it too. And maybe we can talk about that in a bit. Um, the tricky thing over the years is my seizures have changed. So oftentimes a neurologist they want to look for a trigger. Because if they can establish what your trigger is, hopefully we can remove you from the trigger and then stop the seizures from happening or prevent them. So one of the most common triggers I found is the sound of a flushing toilet over the years. Now, tell me how you avoid that.
Yeah.
It's not easy. So I haven't been successful, but it's evolved and changed. That sound doesn't affect me the same way it used to. And my seizures, where I used to blank out and kind of space out, now I actually get very frantic when I have one. I'll say, like, I feel sick. I'm going to throw up. I need water. I need these things. And I go into the space. My wife describes it. She's like, it's almost like talking to a toddler. And so having this condition and it evolving and changing, and already we have neurologists and specialists that say we're not quite sure what to do. How do we fix this? And only recently, within the last year, have I finally connected with a neurologist. And even as quick as last week, or recent as last week, I'm actually getting new information from somebody who actually knows my specific type of epilepsy to the point where he said approximately 0.01% of epileptics have the type of epilepsy you have. You essentially are resistant to medication. There is little we can do to help in that respect. There's some things we can still try, but there's almost a peace knowing that. For somebody
Right.
to affirm and actually say, here's what it is, and for it to make sense to me too, because when I was having a consult with him, normally I would, explain my symptoms to a new neurologist. He started describing my symptoms for me before I even started saying. He's like, I bet you have this, I bet you have this. I'm like, yeah, how did you know? And so I finally feel like I found my person. The difficult thing with that is he showed me all of my MRI scans that I've had since I was 20. So he had access to all of them. And he's like, I have some really tough news for you. What's that? It's like every neurologist you've seen since you were 20 has been reading your MRIs incorrectly, to the point where he flipped the MRI around to show me the underside of my brain. He said, that's where your epilepsy is coming from. That's where your seizures are at. And I have a bruise on the top of my front right temporal lobe that actually I thought was from a brain injury as a child, and that's what every neurologist is hyper focused on. He showed me on the underside with my right amygdala, it's enlarged. He said that actually isn't from brain trauma injury. That's actually from birth trauma. So you probably had a very traumatic birth, which is true. I think my mom was in labor with me for 30 some odd hours. So he's like, that's actually how this started. It's not your fault. Nothing ever happened. It's just, this is what it is. And even to have a single person affirm that and give me an answer, like I was on a Zoom call similar to you and I are right now, and I just couldn't hold back the tears. I just started weeping, partly because I felt like part of it was, why has nobody researched this? Why have I seen so many
Right.
people? And this has been like 18 years that I felt like I lost. If I could have had somebody when I was 20 say this is what it is, and seen that through that eyes, maybe I would have, wouldn't have lost so many years trying different medications and going through the motions. But I did have someone suggest to me too, you almost have to treat it like a loss and mourn it and grieve it and say, this is the time, this is what happened. I need to process it. And now what? Moving forward. So to tie this now into the art creative journey, I've been since a very, very young child, very interested in art, illustrating. It's always been my go-to. I would be the kid, even though I was academically, I did very well in school. I was often the top of my class, but I was always the kid drawing during class and listening. And I found drawing really helped me focus to what I was learning about. And that really stuck with me. And I had every intention in the world of going to Emily Carr. I've shared this. If any of you know my story that's listening, like from the age of about 10, I had my course load chosen for Emily Carr. That's where I was going to go to school. I don't know if you've met any 10-year-olds that actually plan their course load out for school. So that shows dedication. That's how badly I wanted it. And I mean, every time we would go down to Granville Island in Vancouver as a kid, like I'd want to go there on Saturdays and just soak in the culture, and just it was incredible. I just couldn't wait for it. But through my later teen years, as I became a little more impressionable and kind of questioning what the future held, because you start going in 12th grade too, people start asking these questions. What do you want to do? Are you sure this is what you want to do? And I started asking myself. And at that point in time, um, I did have a lot of personal mental health things going on. And some of that resolve came to me with actually starting to attend a church scene and getting involved in a ministry scene. And from there, all of a sudden, I had a ton of people come speak at me at once and say this phrase that they felt like I would be good to work in the ministry or good pastor. The common denominator was they said that they felt like I was very encouraging and it came naturally, and they felt like it was almost could be like a counselor sort of person. They felt that fit the role very well. And when you've got a bunch of people coming at you at once saying a thing and it's a consistent message, you kind of listen to it, especially in being at that age. So in hindsight, would I have done it differently? Yeah, but I probably would have done a lot of things differently. And it's painted to where I am today. And so as I stepped into that role a few years in, I did have a few people there let me know that I couldn't do both. I couldn't pursue a life of art, and I couldn't serve in the ministry and do God's work, as the phrase was used often, effectively. So basically, I was told to choose one. And so when you are presented with that decision of choosing something for you and choosing something for, let's call it a greater good of the power of the universe, there's a little bit of pressure there to go with one over the other. So um, I set the art aside for years and years. Now, fast forward to about 2 or so years ago. Really, I dabbled in art throughout the way, and I had left the church ministry a few years after that, due to some other things that were going on. But that always kind of stuck with me. I always had that. I have always, no matter what aspect of my life, I'm a very creative person. It's intrinsic to who I am. And a few years ago, I had to go on disability from work. And with my job, I have done my damnedest to not go on disability. I've worked at this company I'm at now for 16 years. And as I've climbed the ladder in leadership roles, I've told myself, your epilepsy cannot define what you do. No one can see you as weak or lesser or anything like that because you're epileptic. They have to be able to see you for the other qualities that you exemplify, because your epilepsy, and I always use that phrase, does not define you.
Hmm.
So that has been tough because, as I shared earlier, because my seizures have changed and evolved and are becoming more unpredictable, it's been difficult to navigate what to expect. And I got on a medication that was new to Canada at that time. And in theory, it was one of the first to market that actually was made for the type of epilepsy we thought I had. So I got on it and I became a vegetable, essentially. It numbed me right out. The seizures started to slow down at first, but eventually didn't. But as a result, like, I'm generally, I would like to think I'm a sharp guy and retain things well. But some of my staff, as I was on this medication, they would say like, "You're kind of repetitive," or I'd ask them to go do a task, and they'd come back at me like, "You kind of asked us to do that 10 minutes ago," and I really started to not feel like myself. And it came to a point where a few workers and a few people in my life said, "I think you need to go on a leave from work for a little bit and take care of yourself." And I went kicking and screaming. I did not want to go. But it took me a few months to actually detox off of this drug. And then from there, that short term disability turned into a long term disability, which I've been on ever since then, which, like I said, I fought for years and years to never do. So, what this has allowed me to do in that time, though, is think about things a little differently and go back to my love of art and creating and illustrating. Without this long-term disability that I'm on, I don't think I would have had the time to explore that. And I don't know what career-wise looks for me in the future because where I worked, if I when I do go back to work or whatever that looks like, it's going to be difficult to work in a workspace like that in that role. So we've had different thoughts and conversations on what does the future hold. And my wife asked me, what did you want to be when you grow up? And she knows what I wanted to be. And at that point in time, I wanted to go to Emily Carr to become an animator and get a job at Disney. She told me that, or I told her, I wanted to be an animator, and she just said, "Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you doing the thing? Like, take this opportunity and don't see it as my life falling apart because I'm now on disability, but see it as an opportunity where things have come together to give you the space to explore something that you used to love doing was taken away from you, and now you have limitless potential of what the future could hold through illustration." So that's where I found myself in the last couple of years. I didn't have any intention of doing anything with it other than learning how to draw on an iPad. I thought that would be a cool thing to try out, and that's all it was. And I started sharing some illustrations on Instagram. Part of that was just for me to share, even if only one or two other people saw it, that would be fine. But really, it was for me as an outlet to process some of the anxiety and mental health things I had going on with being on leave and with my epilepsy. And slowly, some people started coming along and showing up. People I didn't intend to ever reach out to. And now a couple of years later, I don't even know what this is that immersed in. I'm just having so much fun falling back in love with the thing I initially fell in love with as a child. Like, I feel like there's some restorative nature to this.
So I'm you know this. I'm a big fan of your personal style. My impression is it combines fine line and tattoo aesthetics in a very raw, vulnerable, and authentic way, while also maintaining how could I call it, positivity and hopefulness. Was that always your personal style, or has that evolved and continue to evolve with you?
Um, the personal style, it's a little less polished in the past, but you would probably look at something that I drew when I was 15 and compare it today, and you would say that's the same guy drawing the same artwork. So that style itself, the kind of thicker black lines on the outlining that I do, and some of the cross hatching and details that are a little more unique to me, um, that's always been there. So that side of it has remained, and learning digital illustration just trial by fire has given me a few different tools to try some different techniques. But no matter what I draw, and to your point, thank you for sharing that, the messages of hope. Hope looks so different for every season that we're in, every day that we're in as well. So hope for me means a lot of different things. And sometimes hope comes from the dark moments. Sometimes it's just for fun. And I haven't, being online, I was thinking about this the other day. They say when you're an online or Instagram presence or whatever you want to call it, they say you need to find your niche. That's encouraged, at least. If you want to be successful, find your niche. I don't know if I have one. An easy niche for me could be the epilepsy route, to connect with people who are epileptic and be in an epilepsy community and literally just draw seizures all day long, or tie my story to that. That would be the easy way for me to become successful and find a niche in that regard. But I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be seen as just the epilepsy guy. I don't want to. I'm an absolute advocate for mental health, specifically men's mental health. I don't want to be just that guy either. This story is about my story, who I am. That's going to look different every day of my life. And maybe my theme behind it is I hope that you find your story through it. Or I hope you find courage and vulnerability to share your story, which kind of actually feels like what you're doing.
So I'm wondering, have you ever thought if your epilepsy played any role in the development of your particular style? Like, to put it another way, do you think that might explain why you focus on line based as opposed to more detailed artwork?
I've had people ask me that question, and I've wondered that too. I've thought before, if I didn't have seizures, maybe I wouldn't be a very good artist. Um, I don't think that's the case. But I mean, where my epilepsy stems from is actually similar to where some of those regions are in the brain. But um, I think what makes my art maybe my art is, again, the story behind it. Maybe, I've never been a painter. That's that's not me. I could do it, but it doesn't feel authentic to myself. So I've asked that question many times, and people have said it too. But I did have somebody say to me recently, if you didn't have epilepsy, you wouldn't be Steve. As much as you want to detach and remove yourself from that, and I, in hindsight, my best life that I could live would be me not being epileptic in my mind, right?
Right.
It's that would be the best case scenario. Why would anybody wish an ailment upon themselves? But in hindsight, I see the bigger picture a little better today than I did a couple of years ago, than I even did 10 years before that. We need that time removed to see what that looks like and how to get there. And what I'm looking forward to is 5 years from now, seeing how I thought today and being like, no, actually, you still weren't getting it right. Or maybe something, like, heaven forbid, but maybe something with my epilepsy in the next few months could go even more south. And maybe I've got a lesson to learn from there. I hope that doesn't happen. But this whole experience has given me a different outlook on that. And maybe what makes my style a little more unique as well is maybe there's a lot of heart that goes into what I do, specifically because I want to be vulnerable with people for two reasons. Like I said, one, to inspire vulnerability in others as well, because we so desperately crave it, but we're all kind of afraid to do it. So this has been a good push for me with courage to step out, and it's healing as well. It's a good process for me to work through some of the anxiety that I have in me and find a way to maybe let it out. And like I said, if it connects with somebody else, that is just like the cherry on top.
So I guess you would say that your return to the art space is kind of allows you to better access your inner dialogue and your emotions.
Absolutely. I 100% is there. The other side too, I do some writing as well. I've done quite a bit of writing, and with the Instagram space, I know it's often that's really the only space I'm in online, because it's visual. It makes a lot of sense for me to be there. I do a lot of writing that's paired with my illustrations because I like the viewer to see their interpretation, but I also like to share with them where I'm coming from too. And very seldom do I leave things vague and up for interpretation. You can look at something and take whatever you want from it. That's okay. But I think the point of connection that maybe makes, or at least the feedback I've received that makes it maybe a little more unique from some of the other things out there, is there's an explanation behind as to why. And then from there, you might find yourself in that story too, or you might disagree. Even with the epilepsy, like if I do an illustration on being epileptic or what it's like having a seizure or the struggle that comes along with it. You might not be epileptic yourself and it might not make sense to you. But if you see the emotion behind what I'm going through, you can say, I've been there. I've been in a dark place. I'm currently in a dark place. I don't know how to navigate this part of my life. And I think that's something that's a universal language. We have that all within us. So that's where the connection comes from.
What would you say your I don't know if you've thought about it this way, but if you had to create a manifesto for your artwork, what's the mission statement? What's your artwork trying to say?
Wow, put on the spot here, man. I've thought about it. See, the thing manifesto is such like a gut word. Like that's like no pressure with the manifesto. Um I think that like I use the phrase vulnerability and authenticity quite a bit, and it would be in that lens. But online, my moniker online, my Instagram handle, my website is called Steve Can Draw, and that came early on from uh, when I decided to pursue illustration, and I thought I should maybe, if I'm going to do something with this and want to put my work out there, I should get a website. And if I need a website, I probably need an email address. And I was just playing with different ideas one night, and my wife was helping me too, and we are just trying to find something. And this Steve Can Draw just, it was a little like poke at fun because I'm like, I hope people could see that yes, I can draw, and maybe I'm okay at it. Uh, but over time, that phrase became permission. The phrase is in my face all day long, but it's given me permission to be able to do it because for a long time in my life, I felt due to some of the circumstances I had earlier in my later teen years, I felt like I wasn't allowed to draw. I felt like I took that opinion upon myself and denied it. And now I'm entering a space of freedom to say, yeah, you can do it. It's good to do it. It's a great thing. So that mission statement essentially of being authentic to who I am, I think is the heart of what I'm trying to do. Hopefully that answers the manifesto.
Perfectly. um, do you ever collaborate with people?
Oh yeah, I love collaborating with people. I as much as I can. Part of it, I mean, it's good for exposure. It's good to get yourself out there. Not even in the necessity of saying, I want to grow my following to be 100,000 follower, Instagram page one day. It's not even about that necessarily, but I always look at it as connections. And maybe there's a person out there who might need to see what I'm doing or where I'm at to feel like somebody else out there feels the same way. So collaborating with another person opens up an entire new world for someone else to see what you're doing, which is great in that respect. The other thing is being able to vibe with another creative. So I've done it with other artists where we've done split drawings together. I've created work with more commonly with writers. So given a visual to their poetry and being able to do that, I always try and keep a collaboration on the go. Even right now, I have one with a gentleman who focuses in neurodiversity. So it's going to make a lot of sense, neurodivergence. So it's going to make a lot of sense for us to do this together. But I might not get around to completing it for the next month or so. But I like to have something on the go because it's good to challenge me too. It pushes me outside of my box as well to try and work with the ideas that somebody else has and work with my own and create something beautiful together that represents both of us and what we're both trying to achieve.
Um, so you've mentioned that it's not just illustrating. You also do some writing. You have a book. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the beauty of being on long-term disability has given me a little bit of opportunity, a little more time to work on some of these creative projects. So I've started writing this book a few years ago, even before I went on the disability leave from work. Um, my book is called Thin Spaces, and what it is, it explores this idea of Celtic spirituality in that people believe there are certain places on this earth, physical places that you can go travel to, where they say the veil between heaven and earth is so thin you could almost reach out and touch heaven from earth. So very spiritual places on earth, and places that people will go to pilgrimages in their life to travel to have these spiritual moments and awakenings. And at a time in my life where I was really doubting what I believe, and I'm still figuring out what that is, when I came across that phrase, one thing I wondered was, well, as somebody who doesn't drive, and as somebody who doesn't really have access to travel very easily, there's not a huge chance that I'm going to be able to drive to some of these places if I'm looking for this awakening. So, why couldn't I find these moments in the day to day and mundane moments of my life? Why couldn't I find inspiration and whatever spirituality means to you is unique through each of our lived experiences? But why couldn't I find that throughout my day? Why couldn't that exist in the warmth of the cup of my coffee? Why not? And so I wrote a book essentially about that and paired it with stories from my own life in which these experiences maybe occurred in ways that were unexpected, um, even through epilepsy. Recognizing, and it was a really good opportunity to, when I did a chapter on epilepsy, I was able to explore some other cultures and how they view epilepsy. And in a few cultures, they actually, some cultures revere people with epilepsy because they see a seizure as a state of somebody cradling between the earth and heaven, essentially. And they actually see them as these wonderful people who have this transcendent ability to remain within the two realms, which to me was very profound because I always thought, as an epileptic, I'm the other. I'm broken and something's wrong with me. But that was very liberating to read that. I've written a chapter about what it's like to experience the woods and forestry and vocation, and even now in my journey, what does vocation look like for workspace, and how do you find special moments through that? So I try to create a very user, I don't want to say friendly, but a user experience with the book as well. Everything had to be perfect in the sense of I wanted a specific type of paper, a certain type of cover. I wanted a visual on the cover of a skull being essentially the skin of a person flying away and a skull being removed. I wanted to have my illustrations throughout the book. I wanted to have a playlist on Spotify that pairs with the book. I wanted somebody to pick up the book and say, I haven't really read anything like this before, and it's different. Even the how I wrote it in prose. So it reads like one large poem, no rhyming, but the whole book reads like a poem. It's all in lowercase letters, and people when they pick it up, they're like, "This is different," and that's really cool. So I'm very proud of myself to have published it and put it out there. That's exciting, and that's something I'm immensely proud of.
I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I hope it resonates with you. I hope my hope with anyone is, I often will say this, I hope this invites you to explore your own thin spaces because I think they're unique to each of us. So, and I'm curious, I love getting messages from people that have read it and said, actually, this is what my thin space is. And I think that's really cool to have. That's the goal, is the interaction with everything I'm doing. I hope for communication and inspiration for others too.
So, what's the you had to say there's one or a few things that people take away from our chat today? What would that be? Keeping in line with communication.
That's a great question. I think like I said earlier, I think we have this intrinsic need to be vulnerable with other people. I think that it's been frowned upon. There's a plethora of reasons why we aren't vulnerable, or there's weakness. I'm gonna approach this even from the lens of what it means to be a man and what manliness looks like. There are many times where that's been frowned upon for people to communicate what they're feeling and articulate what they're feeling. And if you can have an ounce of courage or vulnerability to share what you're actually feeling, especially in light of things like mental health and walking through that, it's
Hmm.
going to be a game changer for you because you're going to find you're not the only one who felt that way. And I'm always down if you're looking for that person to have a conversation with, send me a message because I'm more than happy to be that person for you if you don't feel like you are connecting with whoever that is around you. But listen to that voice in your gut. It knows best. We tell it to shut up all the time. We tell it to be quiet because we give into fear and anxiety. But when it comes to communication, the reality is we want to do it. We want to engage in conversation. I really believe that. Sometimes we just don't know how. And sometimes the language of what communication looks like for each of us, because we have different experiences, is going to look different. So lean into that. Lean into what vulnerability means to you so you can communicate well, so you can explore your authentic self and be the best version of you possible.
Where can people find you?
So on Instagram, you can find me at Steve can draw. Well, steve.ken.draw. Steve can draw was taken. I'm gonna meet that guy one day and tell him off. And my website is stevecandraw.com. So those are really the only platforms that you can find me at. Not a Facebooker. Sorry, guys.
So Steve, I really just want to thank you for being so candid and authentic today, and for your advocacy for mental health, um, and just normalizing being vulnerable. I think that's, like you said, we all have that. We're all vulnerable, but it's not yet okay. I don't know why, but hey, um,
It's maybe it's a learned behavior.
yeah, I
I
honestly
don't
don't know.
I don't know either, but you know what? Even right now, for what it's worth in the scheme of what the universe is and all these things, you and I just spent a little bit of time chipping away at the stigma.
Hmm.
So let that be what it is. That's a celebration in itself, as far as I'm concerned. It's
So
one
once
conversation.
you once said to me how I managed to turn my chaos into a light, I think, to help guide others. So I want to
Yep,
flip the script and say, you're doing the exact same thing. Um, you have managed to turn your own journey into a beacon of hope for others. And I just want to thank you for that.
that means so much. Like that feedback, that I'm gonna carry that. I'm gonna write that down because I need to remember that too. Because the reality is, the hope is there, and I present that. But I'm not gonna shy away from also sharing with you that there's still some dark days, and that's okay. That's good. But thank you. That really means the world.
Thank you.